So how does that work? How does open source work without Git and GitHub?
It's a great question.
Today, I'm interviewing Eddie Jaoude, an open source full stack and DevRel expert. At React Day Berlin, he's going to be talking about MDX and how it's a game changer for React projects documentation. So welcome, Eddie. It's an honor. Thank you for stopping by.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to geeking out with you today.
Awesome. Okay, so what I love to do initially, before we even get started or get into anything, is to do some tech icebreaker questions. You can really get to know someone by some quick or lightning round questions. So I'm just going to ask a question, and you just say the first thing that pops to your mind.
Lightning round.
Tabs or spaces?
Spaces.
Oh, okay. Semicolons or no semicolons?
Semicolons.
Okay. Mac, Windows, or Linux?
Mac.
Okay. All right, now this is a deal breaker whether we can continue this conversation or not. Okay.
Okay.
Your favorite code editor or IDE?
VS Code.
Okay, good. We can continue.
So one.
Okay, last one. Tea or coffee?
Ooh, both. I like both. So
Okay.
I'm a big fan of both.
Okay. No, maybe coffee in the morning, tea in the afternoon.
Exactly.
Something like that. Okay, awesome. Who is Eddie? How did you get into web development? How did you get to where you are right now?
Oh, okay. So I actually did electronic engineering at university, and we had one or two coding modules, and I really hated them. Like I did everything to avoid coding at university because it was just all theoretical and sort this data, and so I really didn't like it. And so I actually came out of uni really hating coding, never wanting to do it. I worked in electronics for 2 years. And during that time, a friend of mine who was really passionate and into coding and open source, and this is a time way before Git and GitHub, and they said, Eddie, why don't you join me at a hackathon? And he was doing it in the Far East, and I was in London, and I joined remotely. And this was, really slow internet, so the screen froze a lot. But I did some HTML and a couple of CSS classes, and that was just a game changer for me. I was like, why do they teach this at university? I actually can see a useful result. I think I just put like a color on the button, and that was it really. But for me, that was a game changer. So from then, I started teaching myself how to code, web dev, typical HTML, CSS, then branched off into PHP and then Java and then JavaScript. And then I think about 5 years into my journey, I discovered open source. Well, I've been using open source, but I really discovered it. I found a bug that I needed for a client project, and someone said, well, why don't you just fix it? It's open source. And I was like, okay. So I got into it. It's a very minor bug, but it was an issue that we had, and I fixed it, and my world changed again. It went from good to great because I got into the open source world. Again, this was still before Git and GitHub. So it was a lot more challenging back then, but absolutely loved it. And then I really jumped into open source and just continued. And same with the community side and the public speaking. And I've really never looked back since. I really enjoy geeking out with everybody.
So how does that work? How does open source work without Git and GitHub?
That's a great question.
I didn't know anything about that. Like I thought you had to have that.
So before Git, for those of you who are watching, Git is your version control system, and before that we had SVN, and before that we had CVS, and before that we had something else. And each time they did get better, and we'd hate the previous one. So we love Git now, and we hate SVN. But when SVN came out, we loved SVN and hated CVS. So they were quite painful to work with, but they were better than nothing. And not having GitHub, everyone hosted their own repositories, if it was SVN repository or CVS. And they had their own kind of tooling on top and all sorts of automation. So each time you wanted to contribute to an open source project, you had to get access to their server by giving them your public SSH keys. You then had to understand their tooling. Everyone used different tools, issue tracking, kind of pull request equivalents, which really weren't pull requests. And yeah, it was really hard. And you had to apply a lot of kind of patches and stuff like that to test things out locally. So yeah, it was very, very painful back then. So when Git and GitHub came along, it was definitely a game changer. And that's when I was like, right, let's get everybody into open source. Now's the real time when we can do it.
Yeah, learn something new every day. I had no idea. Like that's pretty cool. So let's talk about that. So like you've got all of these really cool GitHub awards. Like how did you get, like so deep into open source and helping the community. You also have Eddie Hub community. So like talk about some of that stuff and how those came about.
The GitHub Awards was quite surprising. So for me, I wasn't expecting them. It's not something I was working towards. I was the first like GitHub Star of the year. Again, I didn't even know that was a thing until it was announced at the conference. So it was just all very, very new to me. And to be honest, I was just doing what I love, which is kind of working, coding, geeking out with other people in the community, and that's what I've been doing consistently for, I don't know, 10 years now. And as you mentioned, you've got the community Eddie Hub that I started, I think about 4 or 5 years ago, which focuses on open source. That's the one thing we will talk about. Doesn't matter what technology people are using, but we're focusing on open source. And it's great to see people collaborate on a variety of projects. We have our own projects in Eddie Hub, but they're mainly JavaScript based, whereas other people want to talk about, Python and Java, and it's like, great, have those conversations. So we want a safe space for everyone. So the other thing we do differently in Eddie Hub is we focus on inclusion. So we have a bot which checks for inclusive words. So if someone comes in and says, "Hey guys," the bot doesn't take any action. It just says, "Have you thought about maybe using 'Hey folks' or 'friends'?" And then they can update their message, and then the bot message will go away. And people find it strange at first, but then they really get used to it. And I hardly see bot messages come up anymore because everyone's using really inclusive language. And so that's also something I'm really, really passionate about, making open source and making it, safe for everyone. And it's great to see we even have non-coders in our community who are contributing to documentation, to tests, to design. There's just so many areas people can get involved in.
Yeah, no, that's great. Community building can come with a lot of pain points, but it's so amazing when you get it right. And your community is like I said, your just inclusion and all of that sort of stuff is amazing. All right, so let's move on to talking about the talk you'll be giving at React Day Berlin. So you're going to be talking about MDX, and I love MDX as well, and how it's a game changer for your React project's documentation. And I didn't come on, do you really need documentation? Is it that important? Come on, tell me, Eddie, convince me. I really need documentation?
Absolutely. We really need it because a project that could be amazing, if it hasn't got documentation, people aren't going to use it. They're not going to have a good developer experience. DX, that's a real thing. I don't think people realize it. The amount of messages I get where people say, "Look, I've got a great project. It's just awesome, but I'm not getting any stars, not getting any contributors, any users or anything like that." And you go look at it, and they haven't even got a README, or the README is just like kind of the name of the project. And I've seen other projects that might not be technically as good, but they have really good documentation, and they have the 5,000 stars, and they have so many contributors because they've got good documentation. And it's just so important. And I think we all forget about documentation, but if we made it as part of our pull request, so when we are adding a new feature or making a change, really that pull request should include documentation so it can get reviewed at the same time and keep things in sync. So when it gets merged, documentation is updated as well as the code. If it ever gets pulled out, removed, whatever, it all comes out together as well. So that's really important. I mean, same with automated testing, but that's a separate discussion. But I really think a pull request should contain all those things, which is why I think different people should review each other's pull requests, because then they'll look at it from a different perspective. And I think that's really, really important, which is also why I really love it when new people come to the project and they say, "Hey, Eddie, I'm new to the project. Can you tell me about it?" And I'm like, "Nope. Can you tell me about it? Because if you can't, there's nothing wrong with you. There's something wrong with our project, but with your help, we can make it better." That fresh pair of eyes to a project is super valuable, because once you onboard that person, then you can no longer onboard them again. They've got that insider's knowledge, as it were. So I love it when new people come to the project. So if you're new to tech, if you're new to open source or new to a project, anyone watching, you've got a superpower. You can give that fresh perspective. So please use that to help the project. They'll definitely welcome you.
Yeah, that's amazing. Because the worst thing is you go to a project and there's not even the basics of how to get this up and running. And then you're struggling through, how do I even get this project installed? What do I have to do? And you're working through it. And then, yeah, as you're working through it, maybe you're helping them, like you said, helping them create that documentation that's not there, or maybe their documentation is there and there's a few things that are out of sync or not there. That as you're going through with the fresh set of eyes, you can then help them to improve their existing documentation.
Exactly.
cool.
I mean, you mentioned out of sync. I mean,
Mhm.
out of date or out of sync
Mm,
documentation, I think is worse than no documentation because people trust it, but it's incorrect. So it's quite difficult to find that balance. I find if something's out of date, I'd rather delete it, and therefore someone else can fill it in later on rather than someone else blindly following it and it's not working because it's out of date. So it's just finding that balance. But documentation is just so important. I think we should be able to onboard people very, very quickly. And I think also a lot of projects might have good documentation, but they've only got kind of hello world documentation. But when you actually want to do a real world example, you don't know what you need to do. So I think people could add value by doing alternative real world examples for documentation, because I just find sometimes that misses. Sometimes I find that's missing a lot in documentation.
for sure. And so why MDX specifically? Why not just regular Markdown?
True. So I've done a variety of projects with different types of documentation, from just standard Markdown, as you mentioned, all the way up to like ASCII docs and ASCII Doctor and like full on kind of almost book like documentation. And I found the two extremes aren't a good balance. I think MDX is in the middle. It gives us the simplicity of Markdown, but also the flexibility of having code within our documentation or components. Let's say we don't really want to clutter it with code, but we could put components in it where we could have a copy button to copy a code block, or have an alert box to kind of pop out, because Markdown's great, but it is limited to what it can do. I think it has kind of 8 different styles, but sometimes you do want that bit more. So yeah, MDX gives us that bit more power, and then we can use, say, alerts, notifications from our actual web app in our documentation. So we've got that consistency of that design and style, which I really like.
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head actually what MDX stands for, but I view it as like Markdown extended. Like it just has the extra stuff. I don't know if that's what it was meant to be, but
I will. I don't know either, so I will go with that one. I like your answer.
so I mean basically it's the the regular Markdown that you're used to, but then you can add extra components into it. You can add interactivity and different things to it, which is really cool. I do enjoy working with MDX as well, especially in like I even use MDX in blog articles, for instance. Like you can add that extra interactivity to your articles as well.
Yeah, it's super nice. I can't wait to show some demos. I mean, we're using it in the BioDrop project quite a lot. And I can't wait to show some examples of what people have done, not even necessarily me, but people from the community have made these improvements. I'm like, oh, wow, that's really, really awesome. And it doesn't have to be super complicated as well, which is really good.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, talk about that real quick. The BioDrop project, because that's going very well. It seems like.
It is going really well, actually. So I'll start at the beginning. So I did about 2 years ago a live stream, and I went on the live stream and I said, well, what can we build in an hour and a half? And someone suggested, well, let's build an open source link tree alternative. So I thought, okay, fine. So we built that in React, and we did that in an hour and a half. And then I woke up the next morning to like 200 pull requests. And I was like, okay, wow. So the next 12 months, it was, really busy, reviewing people's pull requests, adding new features. We went beyond kind of the basic links that Linktree provides. We were called Link Free, by the way, at the time. It was also named on the live stream too by the community. Did that for 12 months. And then I thought, right, you know what? Actually, I could make this into an open source SaaS platform. So we went to Next.js. We added some even more features like add your repos, events that are coming up. React Day Berlin will be on my profile page, but it also gets aggregated up into the overall app events page as well. We've got testimonials. There's so many features that have been added by the community now. And it's super interesting to see it grow, see the open source project grow and the community get involved to work on a real world project. I think we have over 3,500 users now, and we've way past 2 million profile views on the project as well. So it's great fun. So if anyone wants to get an open source and wants to geek out with me daily, I'm working on the project full time, then you know where to find me.
Nice. It's a true testament to what's possible with open source. It's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I couldn't have done it without the help of the community.
For sure. Awesome. Well, I think that covers everything that we're going to talk about today. Okay, so before we wrap up, Eddie, anything that you want to add? Any shout outs? Anything you want to talk? You have an open mic right now.
Oh, no pressure. I look forward to geeking out with you at React Day Berlin and also in open source. We can do that remotely. If you can't make it to the event, then come and join us in an open source project and let's all learn together.
Awesome. Amazing. So React Day Berlin, it's going to be in person December 8th and online December 12th. Don't be sure to not miss that. There's links in the video description if you want to sign up for either of those in-person or remote sessions. So thank you again, Eddie. It's been a pleasure having you. We'll speak again very soon, I'm sure.
Thank you.